Hello and welcome to today's informational webinar on the 2019 Climate Leadership Awards. My name is Amy Bailey, and on behalf of the Climate Leadership Awards Steering Committee, I want to thank you for your interest in the awards and for joining us today to learn more about the program. Leaders that advance climate solutions are needed now more than ever, and we hope that you will find today's presentation helpful and consider submitting your own application. In addition, we invite you to spread the word about this fantastic opportunity to elevate leaders and encourage voluntary action. So today we are providing an introduction to the awards and details about the eligibility and application requirements for each of the 6 award categories. And we'll also offer helpful tips as you prepare your submissions and answer any questions you might have at this stage. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction to your presenters today, I am Amy Bailey. I'm the Director for Sustainability and Engagement at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. I'm joined by our partner at the Climate Registry, Jordan Ferris, a Program Associate, and Nancy Meyer, the Director for Corporate Engagement at C2ES. So just a few webinar logistics before we get started. I want everyone to know that all attendees are currently muted to reduce background noise. If you have questions, which we are welcoming today, please submit those in the online control panel that's on the right hand of the screen. It's kind of your go-to webinar control panel that includes a lot of other drop-downs as well. Today's presentation will be available on the CLC YouTube channel, as well as the Climate Leadership Conference and Awards website. So if you found that you missed something that we mentioned, or you need to go back and hear it again, this will be a resource for you going forward. So with that, I'd like to start out with just a general introduction and overview of the Climate Leadership Awards, and then we'll get into the details for each category shortly. Just as background, the Climate Leadership Awards is a national program that recognizes and incentivizes exemplary corporate, organizational, and individual leadership in response to climate change. We showcase and recognize that voluntary action on climate and energy under the unified banner of C2ES and the Climate Registry. And together, we're sending a strong signal that innovative and sustainable leadership in reducing GHG emissions and enhancing resilience are critical to addressing climate change. The U.S. EPA was a founding partner and sponsor of the awards program from 2012 until August 2017. And since 2012, the program has honored more than 150 recipients around the country. And so this program has been around for quite some time now. In 2018, we were proud to honor 15 organizations, 3 partnerships, and 1 individual for their leadership in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and taking climate action. You can learn more about these leaders at the website shown here. And every year, you know, the Climate Leadership Award winners find this a really valuable recognition for their work. We've got examples of some of their feedback posted on the slide right here from Citi, Allergan, IBM, that have all kind of supported some of the hard work that happens at these organizations over the course of many years, really. So awards recipients are honored at a formal dinner at the Climate Leadership Conference, which is a 3-day event that serves as a perfect complement to the awards. And this year, the conference will take place on March 20th to 22nd in Baltimore, Maryland. So we hope that you will mark your calendars there and join us in Maryland. During the course of the next few months, all of the conference updates will be provided at the climateleadershipconference.org website. But I do want to give you a quick overview of the event before we dive into the awards. So each year, as I mentioned, C2ES and the Climate Registry host the Climate Leadership Conference, and this is an event that brings together 400 or more climate professionals from the public and private sectors, including federal and state government officials, local leaders, industry leaders, nonprofit experts. We kind of span the spectrum there. And the conference events cover innovative ideas and best practices on topics like energy efficiency, clean energy opportunities, setting and achieving greenhouse gas reduction targets, engaging your supply chains, and other applications for reducing emissions. And increasingly, the conference has provided a really great forum for emerging best practices on resilience and adaptation planning and implementation. And so, of course, with all of these experts in the same room, there's quite a bit of peer exchange on managing carbon footprints, both internally and throughout the supply chain, and with a high focus on market-based measures and the corporate sector. There is quite a bit of focus on the bottom line. So just wanted to show a few pictures of last year's event here. As you can imagine, conference participants talk about all of the leading issues facing climate action today, leveraging clean energy opportunities, managing climate risks, disclosures and questionnaires, education and engagement strategies, and I could go on, but I think we want to learn more about the awards today. I'll just say that it's always a well-received conference, and many folks come back year after year, and so we do hope you will join us in 2019. Now that you have a little bit of background on the Climate Leadership Conference, I want to turn our attention to the awards. This slide shows the program's 6 categories that we will be discussing in a few minutes. Over the years, these categories have really allowed us to elevate the activities and progress of organizations and individuals all over the country. Now, if you have participated in the awards program in previous years, we would like to note 2 changes this year. First, there is an update to the application process. In previous years, applicants made their submissions via email. This year, all applications will be submitted through an online platform called Smarter Select. And any required third-party references can be included with your application materials or emailed by the reference to applications@climateleadershipawards.org. That information will be repeated later and is available on the website. And secondly, a new change is that we have adjusted the eligibility criteria for greenhouse gas reduction goal period. Previously, the accepted goal period was 3 to 12 years, and that period is now extended to 3 to 15 years. My colleague Jordan will discuss this more in his presentation. Because we hope you will all consider applying for an award, we wanted to walk you quickly through the application and submission process. Before beginning your application, please be sure to review the eligibility requirements and evaluation criteria for each category. These are available for each award at the Climate Leadership Awards webpage. The link is provided right here. Now, when you're ready to begin filling out the application, simply download and save the form to your computer. For the organizational and leadership award categories, you will also want to download the third-party reference form. Then you'll complete the form and prepare all supporting materials, save them to your computer, and upload through the CLA Smarter Select portal. Now, because this submission process is slightly different than previous years, we wanted to provide a preview of the CLA Smarter Select portal, just so that you're familiar with it. Once you click on the application link, you'll be prompted to create a unique login. This login is going to allow you to sign back in at any time before the deadline to make any needed adjustments to your application. So this is a very helpful addition this year. The CLA Smarter Select portal will send you confirmation emails when you have created your login and again when you have successfully submitted your application. This is a helpful indicator for you to know that we are receiving your materials. Now, once you have set your login, you will be shown the first page of the CLA application form, which is shown on your screen here. On the right-hand panel, you will see an overview of the application steps so that you can track how far along you are in the process. You can also click on the printer icon to print the application form as you fill it out. And now, as you can see, the application form fills most of the screen here. First, you select the award category you are applying for. Next, you'll be prompted to provide the contact information relevant to the application, and this should match the contact information included in your PDF. The third page will prompt you to upload your completed PDF application. As I mentioned earlier, these forms can be downloaded from the Climate Leadership Awards website. Once your application document is successfully uploaded, you'll click the next button to upload any supporting materials associated with the application. We'll get these specific documents when we discuss each award category in just a moment. The final page of the Smarter Select application will prompt you to formally submit, and at that point you will receive a confirmation email that your materials have been received. So before we dive into the award categories, I just want to highlight some important dates so that you can mark your calendars. As you know, the application period is now open and will remain so until the deadline of September 27th. Notifications of winners and non-winners will be made in late December to early January. And in 2019, the award recipients will be honored at the Climate Leadership Awards dinner during the conference, which is occurring March 20th to 22nd, 2019 in Baltimore. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jordan Ferris of the Climate Registry, who will tell us more about eligibility requirements and get into a few of our first award categories.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you all so much for being here with us today. We're really excited about this year's awards program, and we're really thrilled to be bringing the 2019 Climate Leadership Conference to Baltimore, a city I love, so I hope you'll all consider joining us there in March. Just wanted to address one question we had come in so far. The question is, so we'll still have to complete the nomination in Word, then convert to PDF and upload in the platform. And yes, that is the process this year. So we still have, if you're familiar with the program, the application forms kind of similar to how they've looked in past years. But instead of putting it all in an email to us, you'll put this all in the Smarter Select platform and upload it just so we have everything in the right place. You're kind of confident in getting the responses and confirmations you need as well. So hopefully makes life a little bit easier for all of us there. But happy to kind of continue to address some of these questions at the end or as they come in as well. So I'm going to be covering some of the general eligibility criteria for the Climate Leadership Awards program. If we could do next slide, please. And first off, this is kind of a lot of information to take in at once. So I want to note that all of these criteria are found on the website and as an appendix in each application. So please feel free to check there for more information. You can also consult our FAQ page, which has further context and information on a lot of these requirements. We're going to try and do a flyover today, and there are more details available on some of these pieces if you do have more questions there. So really to dive into some of the eligibility requirements, we do require that applicants have significant operations in the United States, and the organizational budget must be at least $100 million, except for any innovative partnerships category, which functions a little bit differently. And in general, the greenhouse gas inventory and goal requirements are similar across the goal setting, goal achievement, supply chain, and organizational leadership awards. We'll talk through, again, the awards categories kind of in more detail later on. But in general, organizations must disclose their greenhouse gas emissions publicly and have an absolute greenhouse gas emissions goal that fulfills the criteria and is sufficiently aggressive. And in this program, we define aggressiveness as at least a 1.8% reduction per year over the life of the goal. And in general, leadership activities must have taken place between January 1st, 2016 and September 27th, 2018, so the end of the goal period. We can do next slide, please. So to talk a little bit more about the greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal component and what we're looking for here, the emissions goal must, at minimum, cover all U.S. operations. We encourage global or worldwide reporting, but the U.S. kind of geographical component is the minimum. And this goal should cover all Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and we do require that Scope 2 emissions be reported to the market-based and location-based method as outlined in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's Scope 2 guidance. The base year used for the goal should be no more than 4 years prior to the year the goal was publicly announced, and the goal period should be between 3 and 15 years. So this is kind of a new tweak that we've made to the program, as Amy mentioned earlier. This was done in part to recognize that organizations are setting more medium-term targets and maybe expanding the time horizon that they're looking at to make decisions around climate risk and mitigation. This was also done to better align with some of the guidance outlined by the Science Based Target Initiative, which is existing best practice for setting goals. So basically hoping to kind of better align with that. And I think I'll touch on this a little bit later too, but the applications will ask if you've set a science-based target, and this isn't a requirement. It's just a recommendation and can help kind of give us more information on how your organization has gone about setting a goal if you have set a science-based target. And these goals must also be aggressive. As I mentioned, we're looking for a 1.8% per year reduction over the life of a goal. So a 5-year goal, for instance, must commit to at least a 9% total reduction. And next slide. And as far as the greenhouse gas inventory, as we've mentioned, leadership in this application program does include publicly disclosing your greenhouse gas emissions. So with your application, you should submit documentation of a current inventory that's publicly reported, including links to where it could be found. That could be TCR's CRIS platform, your CDP disclosure, CSR reports, or so on. And again, this is a little bit different in the individual leadership and innovative partnership categories, so mainly applies to the 4 other ones. And inventories must also be verified or undergone third-party review. And we do have kind of more information and definitions on that in our FAQs online. Next slide, please. There you go, thanks. So we usually get some questions about how Scope 3 and biogenic emissions are handled in the program. Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions outside your direct control, like employee commuting and travel, supply chain emissions, waste disposal, and so on, are only required to be reported if they're included in your reduction goal. So again, if your goal kind of explicitly includes those Scope 3 emissions, in addition to the Scope 1 and 2 emissions, you should include that in your inventory, and those should also have undergone a third-party review or verification. And biogenic emissions, which are CO2 emissions resulting from the combustion of biomass, are handled similarly. If you kind of included them in your goal and set them as part of this target you're working towards, they should be included as part of the public verified greenhouse gas inventory. And like I said, the detailed criteria can be found on the website or in the appendix of each application. So just a high-level overview for now, but let's kind of move on to dive into the GHG management categories. So these requirements are similar to the general inventory and goal requirements that is outlined, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much going through here. Could you next slide, please? So leadership in greenhouse gas management looks like the public disclosure of entity-wide greenhouse gas emissions, setting or achieving an aggressive greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal, and the implementation of mitigation activities that show that your business or organization is really taking leadership and direct action in dealing with climate change. Next slide, please. So the goal setting certificate is what it sounds like. It's recognizing organizations that publicly set aggressive greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And applicants will be evaluated on the following things. Again, we've touched on these kind of already. The inclusion of a base year inventory report broken out by scope 1 and 2 emissions, the inclusion of verification statements or review statements for that inventory, demonstration of an aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goal, which is current and was publicly communicated when it was set, and a thorough description of planned greenhouse gas mitigation activities aimed at meeting the reduction goal. Next slide. So again, leadership in this case is setting the goal, so it kind of falls into that time window we described, which is January 1st, 2016 through the end of September 2018. Within the chosen goal boundaries, the goal must cover all scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and that should kind of remain consistent through the goal period. And again, has that same 3 to 15 year goal period requirement and the 1.8% aggressiveness threshold over the length of the goal. And next slide, please. So the Goal Achievement Award, as you can imagine, is recognizing organizations that have actually achieved the aggressive greenhouse gas goals that they have set. Applicants, again, will need to document the base year and the goal achievement year and include verification or third-party review statements, and also demonstrate that the goal was publicly set at least 3 years prior to the achievement. Applicants must also include descriptions of at least 3 mitigation activities that helped contribute to meeting the goal. And next slide. So again, everything I just mentioned about goal setting also applies to the Goal Achievement Award, but we're paying a particular attention to that achievement year inventory, so that has to be included to kind of show us that you have met this goal and achieved it. Importantly, if your organization's base year, which you're kind of measuring your progress against, was impacted by any major structural changes like an acquisition or divestiture, or if there were errors or a change in calculation methodology, really anything that alters that inventory by more than 5%, that base year must be adjusted, and that adjustment should be verified or third-party reviewed. And as I mentioned, goal achievers have that extra year to show leadership activity, so that's between January 1st, 2015 and September 27th, 2018. Next slide, please. And again, we do get some questions on some of these particular greenhouse gas accounting issues. So as I mentioned, we do require that inventories be reported with market and location-based scope 2 emissions, as outlined in the scope 2 guidance. And I won't kind of get into depth on here, but you can read more in the guidance itself and in the FAQs. RECs and offsets can also both be applied to inventories as part of a comprehensive greenhouse gas mitigation portfolio. However, the application form does request information on certification, quality, and vintage of RECs, and certification of offsets as well. And next slide, please. So in general, the more information you can give us, the better. We'll be cross-referencing the emissions totals listed on the application with what's found on the public disclosure, your CSR report or CDP disclosure, PCR CRIS report, or so on, and the verification statements. As for verification, please make sure you do submit this documentation as we do require it. These verification or review documents ideally should include the relevant protocol the inventory was measured to. So for instance, TCR's general reporting and verification protocols, and it should also list the emissions totals for that year. Please also clearly link to where your goal and emissions inventory are made publicly available. So as I mentioned, that could be the website, press release, CSR report, include page numbers where relevant, or even sometimes just a relevant portion of a CSR report is really helpful to kind of focus our attention on where we should be looking if that's a really lengthy document. And again, you have the option to specify if your goal is a science-based target, and that's really helpful to us to kind of understand a little bit more about how your organization has approached this, but again, it is not a requirement. So I think with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Nancy Meyer.
Thank you so much, Jordan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So as Jordan and Amy mentioned, my name is Nancy Meyer. I'm the Director of Corporate Engagement here at C2ES, and I will be covering the next 4 award categories for you, starting with the Innovative Partnership Certificate. So to dive right into this program, the Innovative Partnership Certificate recognizes organizations that are working collaboratively to achieve exceptional climate mitigation or resilience outcomes. We have some of the details listed here, but I'm going to move to the next slide that will dive into a little more depth about some of the specific eligibility criteria. In general, partnerships should be as a partnership implies, that means the applicant should be involved in a partnership of 2 or more primary stakeholders, and those stakeholders can include government entities, companies, academic institutions, and it's okay for partnerships to include only private sector companies as long as that partnership isn't built around a business relationship, and as long as the magnitude of the achievement merits recognition under this program as well. That being said, partnerships should be active while you've applied for this award, and those partnerships should be formalized and focus specifically on addressing climate change. We've already had some questions come through in the Q&A box, and this goes for all of our awards, but it is a primarily U.S.-focused awards program. That being said, primary organizations or stakeholders do not necessarily have to be headquartered in the United States as long as significant activity takes place in the United States. So that's definitely true for this particular certificate. So keep that in mind for all of the others moving forward, and I'll try to remind you as we move forward as well. And then the last thing I want to mention here are that partnerships should also have, 1, an established baseline for the goal that they are addressing, 2, having shown significant progress in achieving that goal, and 3, all of those activities, or at least the bulk of those activities, need to have taken place since January 2016. So with that, let's dive in and look at the evaluation criteria. So for this particular award category, I'd like to note that all of the applications are evaluated by an independent panel of judges, and those applications are considered on a competitive basis to other applicants who apply. And so this is different than how the winners for the GHG Goal Setting and Achievement Awards are determined that Jordan just described. So for this category, you are competing against other applicants, granted that you meet all of the award criteria and that the review panel determines that the activities submitted by the applicant merit recognition under this award. So in terms of the specific evaluation criteria, you can see them all listed here. I won't read them all. They're actually quite similar to some of the other awards that we're going to go through, but just keep in mind that some of the key criteria include that you should have a fairly high magnitude in terms of the publicly established goals that you're seeking to achieve, showing the delivery of results and that those results are measurable and verifiable, that the partnership demonstrates leadership and innovation, that it's replicable, that it shows that it can be sustained over time, as well as has high quality engagement with the stakeholders that are involved in the program. So I think I'll leave it at that. You can always dive in and look at more details on the award application itself, as Jordan also mentioned. To provide a bit of a sense of what an innovative partnership looks like, I've provided a few examples on this slide. So it could include various city or local government stakeholders working on regional planning activities around resilience. It could include government entities working with the private sector or academia on a cross-sector initiative dealing with water potentially. It could be a joint venture with different types of organizations seeking to deliver results that go beyond business as usual. I think that's key here with all of our awards. We want to see results that are beyond what you might expect to see normally. And in terms of what's not eligible, I'd just like to reiterate what I had mentioned earlier, or what was stated earlier on one of the slides, is that partnerships based on business activities or procurement of services are not eligible. And all activities should go beyond the normal scope of business or mission for participating organizations as well. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about whether or not a partnership that you're involved in might be considered eligible for this award. So that wraps it up for the Innovative Partnership Certificate. So now I'd like to move on to our next award category, which is Supply Chain Leadership. For a lot of organizations, the overall greenhouse gas impact from the supply chain can often greatly exceed that of their internal operations, particularly when you think about the product life cycle emissions. So that's why we've established this category to recognize organizations that are on the cutting edge of managing their GHG emissions in their supply chains. Note that applicants here should be moving beyond just addressing the GHG impact of their own operations and towards a comprehensive assessment of the impacts in their supply chain, and this includes from raw materials and products that they buy from upstream suppliers to the products and services that they deliver to customers downstream. So as such, we do highly encourage that participants have conducted, or applicants rather, have conducted Scope 3 emissions inventory. I believe Jordan mentioned this earlier. They should also have an established Scope 3 goal, and it's recommended that reported emissions have undergone some kind of a third-party critical review. Transparently documenting your supply chain emissions, we believe, is an important element to showing leadership in your area. So keep that in mind. It's not a specific criteria, but one that we definitely look at. In terms of some of the specific criteria, I want to note that, like the Innovative Partnership Certificate, applications for this category are also reviewed by a panel of experts. And some of the key evaluation criteria that they consider include the level of leadership, innovation, and achievement in reducing supply chain emissions. Evaluations will specifically look at the breadth and the scope of the implemented program, the greenhouse gas reductions that have been achieved, or the potential for long-term reduction in emissions, as well as the degree to which applicants have gone beyond business as usual or normal business practices. So all of these activities need to have taken place since January 2016, but as with a lot of the other applications, you can refer to activities that have taken place before that time, since reviewers might consider the length of time an action has been in practice as part of the overall picture in terms of what you've achieved in your supply chain. In terms of the specific application, it does ask applicants for examples of leadership across these 4 categories that are listed on the slide: internal administrative actions, collaboration, measurement and reporting, and GHG reductions. And so I wanted to provide a few examples of what your company might consider describing under each of these leadership action areas, just so that you better understand what you might be able to fill in. It doesn't mean you have to say all of these things, they're just examples, but I thought I might walk through a couple of them just to give a better sense. So for internal administrative actions, companies are asked to describe their internal administrative leadership taken to address supply chain emissions. And so that could include codifying greenhouse gas related criteria in procurement processes, for example. And then to illustrate collaboration, companies are asked to describe any collaborative leadership initiatives along your supply chain, and that could include engaging with suppliers and providing GHG management resources, or implementing supplier scorecards on emissions. So that's just another example there. In terms of showing leadership on measurement and reporting, those activities could include if you complete a comprehensive public reporting and third-party verification of your supply chain emissions, or if you conduct significant product lifecycle analysis, that could be considered examples of your leadership in that space. And then lastly, to show leadership in GHG reductions, this is where providing verifiable Scope 3 emission reductions could be helpful. You could also point to if you encourage your suppliers to set public greenhouse gas reduction goals or take other measures into account. So it's not one of the, it doesn't have to be any one of those specific things, but those are just examples of how you can have a competitive application for this particular award. Just a reminder, again, that these slides will be posted later, so if you can't grasp all of this information here during the webinar, feel free to refer back to the posted slides if needed. So with that, I'm going to charge ahead to the next leadership category, or the award category rather, which is individual leadership. So this award category seeks to recognize individuals who embody what it means to be a true climate leader. And this can be by directing their organization's work on climate change, as well as engaging more broadly with their peers and communities to achieve what we would consider extraordinary outcomes. And so applicants for this award must reside and work in the United States. So as I mentioned before, their company does not necessarily have to be headquartered here. But again, the applicant must reside and work in the U.S. In addition, their employer needs to have annual revenues or an annual budget over $100 million. And like with many of the other categories, the leadership activities should have occurred since January 2016, but your application can refer to actions before that time and explain how they serve as a foundation for some ongoing or current activities. I also wanted to note here that at least 2 third-party references are required for this award category. Amy mentioned those earlier on in the presentation, but those can be downloaded from the Individual Leadership Award page that can be found on the climateleadershipconference.org website. And those references can be collected by the applicant and submitted with other award materials through the Smarter Select portal that Amy showed us today, or the reference can email those directly using the email applications@climateleadershipawards.org. Again, all that information is found in online and in the application itself. So in terms of evaluation criteria for this particular award, I have several listed up here. It includes things from innovation and thought leadership to leading on key climate initiatives and engaging in productive partnerships and collaborating with peers. It could also include education and training of staff and external stakeholders. So there are several activities here, but please note that all should be considered to exceed business as usual for an individual to be considered a competitive applicant. And with that, I think that's all I really have to say with this particular award category. So let's move on to our final award category, which is organizational leadership. Organizational Leadership Award seeks to recognize organizations that go beyond business as usual and demonstrate leadership in managing their operational GHG emissions and engaging with external networks. And this can include their peers and their partners. Examples could be establishing management structures, allocating budget to address climate issues, engaging in your supply chain, and demonstrating a track record of establishing and achieving greenhouse gas reduction and climate risk mitigation goals. Similar to the Individual Leadership Award, third-party references are required for this category as well, but you must submit 3 third-party references instead of just 2 for individuals. Again, that's a minimum. I think you can submit more than that. And like with the Individual Leadership Award, you can download those reference forms from the website, climateleadershipconference.org, under the Organizational Leadership Award category, and then email those, or rather upload those to the Smarter Select portal, or have your references email us directly with those. In terms of the criteria for this particular award, they're very similar, again, to what we saw for individual leadership, except I want to point out that there are 2 additional criteria that are considered for organizations, and that includes strategic integration of climate mitigation or adaptation activities into the company's operations, as well as disclosure of climate-related risks and opportunities. And that relates to best practices described by the Financial Stability Board's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So if you're familiar with that and are a leader in that particular area, this might be a topic that you might want to highlight for your organization if you're applying for this award. I also want to note that the general eligibility requirements that Jordan went over earlier, as well as the greenhouse gas inventory and verification and the greenhouse gas reduction goal requirements, are also required for this category. So there is additional hurdle there. You can, again, refer to the appendix of the application for a complete list of the requirements, and that goes for all the applications. And all of those can be downloaded directly from the Climate Leadership Award website. And I also just want to note that for all categories, previous winners who apply will only be recognized for new accomplishments, rather. So you cannot apply for the same accomplishment just 3 years later once you're eligible to apply again for a Climate Leadership Award. So with that, I think I'm going to pause, and I think we've gotten lots of questions in. I'm going to hand the mic back over to my colleague Amy, who's going to moderate our Q&A discussion.
Great, thank you, Nancy. And just as a reminder, you can input your questions in the question box on the control panel for GoToWebinar, and we will get to them there. The first question is about our GHG emissions reduction criteria. Jordan, you might be best suited for this question. What's the logic behind the 1.8% greenhouse gas emissions reduction target per year?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. That's a really good question. So the CLA Steering Committee selected this 1.8% threshold based on the IPCC's Fifth Assessment Report. And in the Fifth Assessment Report, they made a recommendation that in order to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius, global emissions need to be reduced between about, I think, 41 to 72% between 2010 to 2050. So if you kind of assume a straight line trajectory to where we need to be, that averages 1% to 1.8% a year. And the committee went kind of with the upper threshold of that. And then also compared this to a lot of aggressive goals that had been set through the Climate Leaders Program, goals reported through CDP, and previous goals submitted to the Climate Leadership Awards as well, to ensure that that is kind of accurate and attainable and sufficiently aggressive to get us to where we need to go in terms of decarbonization.
Great, thank you. And Jordan, a few additional questions about greenhouse gas inventories. Can you clarify if the greenhouse gas inventory that's submitted must be third-party verified in order to qualify? You know, there are consultants that create the inventories, but possibly not having additional third party outside the consultant company. And then I'll have a couple other similar questions after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do require verification to a reasonable or limited level of assurance, but there is also the option for a third-party review of inventories as well. But again, it is really important in any case that it is kind of a third party that's coming in and reviewing these emissions, and that it is certified in some way. So yes, that is kind of an important part of the program.
Okay, and then to follow up on this, are there requirements for where the greenhouse gas emissions are publicly disclosed? Is a press release sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily have firm requirements. I mean, I think our biggest requirement just that it is public and publicly accessible. I mean, ideally this would be, you know, transparent in terms of what kind of carbon accounting standard was used, in terms of what may be excluded or included. You know, all of these things. You know, ideally we'd want to see, and that's something that's generally kind of included when you know you're reporting to the climate registry or to a program like CDP. So I think those are kind of our preference, is to see it in that form. But again, corporate sustainability report is also a really common place to list this information, as well as to list goals on an organization's website. And that, you know, can take the release or the form of a press release if that is kind of publicly accessible and you're able to find it on the website. I think that would be acceptable.
Great. And we have a question about the application process. Can more than one individual from a company access a draft application in the online platform? For example, could one person complete it for another to review and submit? And I think the answer here is as long as the login and password information is shared, then that should be possible. So I think you wouldn't be able to have different logins and passwords to access one application. Now, another question was to go over deadlines.
Sure.
Nancy, I'll tee that over to you. And can you please remind everyone where the awards will be held?
Thanks, Amy. So I just put those important dates to remember back up on the screen. So just a reminder that the award application period closes September 27th, and then we'll spend the next month or two going through doing our review of all the applications, and we should know by mid-December to early January of who the winners are, and we'll send out winner and non-winner notifications during that time. So expect those at least by mid-January, if not before. And then that will all be leading up to the Climate Leadership Conference, which is taking place this year in Baltimore, Maryland, March 20th to the 22nd. And I believe Amy already stated this, but I'll say it again. We always have an awards dinner at the conference during which our winners of the Climate Leadership Awards get honored. And that's a really great dinner to be involved with, and a great place to celebrate everyone's achievements. So I hope you can all join us for that, regardless of whether or not you apply and submit and win an award.
Yep, always a fun night. So, Jordan, a question for you on the different generation goals. So I think this was back referring to one of the eligibility requirements. Just kind of reiterating, if you can, about if things apply to a first generation goal or if organizations have a second generation goal, if that's all right.
Yeah. Also, a good question. I did kind of skip over that a little bit for the sake of time. These requirements kind of apply to any goal, whether it be a first generation goal or a second generation goal, et cetera. So we're still looking for that 1.8% annual reduction, and we're still looking for kind of that 3 to 15 year window. But of course, we do allow for you to use the same base year if you're setting a second generation goal or a third generation goal or so on. That goal period just needs to be extended by 3 to 15 years, and again, kind of adhere to that 1.8% annual aggressiveness threshold.
Great. And then we had kind of a more specific question, a little bit about our history. And I'll tee this over to Jordan. Besides the University of California, Irvine, have other universities been recognized in this awards process?
That's a good question, and I'm flipping through some of our past winners right now, and to be honest, off the top of my head, I don't remember. It's possible that we may have had some university partners, especially kind of in the partnership category, be awarded, but I can take a deeper look and get back to the person who answered the question.
Great, thank you. And I think we're making our way through our list of questions here. I'll give another minute to see if any others come through.
Hey, Amy, I am seeing a question that might be of interest to some folks about, if this is a global, maybe multinational company that does have U.S. operations, are they still eligible to apply? And the answer is yes. If you have a global inventory and a global goal, you are eligible to apply if you meet the other requirements. But you do just need significant U.S. operations. So if you have a U.S. kind of based subsidiary or significant business operations here, that would suffice.
Great, thank you for clarifying. And I think another quick question over eligibility here. The threshold size of the organizations are in the base of US $100 million in size. Have the organizers thought about well-established nonprofits being able to apply in the individual and or professional category based upon impact versus budget size?
Jordan,
I don't know if that was.
do you know anything about the history there? I haven't been involved long enough, I think, to be able to answer that question well, at least right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I don't know about this year if, you know, we kind of be able to you know, alter those requirements, but we could certainly consider it or kind of look at different ways of approaching this going forward, and then kind of happy to follow up with some of you offline who might be interested in learning more or talking through that a little bit more as well.
Definitely, and if there are, just a reminder, some really specific organization-specific questions that you want to ask us, definitely follow up once we're done here today. Always happy to kind of answer those one-off questions as they come through.
Yeah, and I can say from what I've seen over past years is that there's really an opportunity for nonprofits and nonprofit leaders to really shine in some of the existing categories. So we do have, you know, innovative partnerships being one of the most obvious. So I think we are. Oh, I have one more. Again, this is about the universities and the financial minimum. So I think we're answering that question there. So if there are any other questions that you have, please let us know. This, as a reminder, this will be posted online on our YouTube page and then soon on our climateleadershipconference.org website. And I will just reiterate that we really encourage you to take a look at your activities and the partnerships that you've engaged in over the past few years and think about how you could maybe apply for an award through this. We think this is a really great opportunity to send a large message to the folks in your organizations, to your stakeholders, and a much larger group as well. So again, the questions can come to questions@climateleadershipawards.org. The submission for the final application forms link is right here. And you can learn more about all of these awards on our website. And I think with that, I will conclude our webinar today. And thank you all again for joining us, and good luck in the application process.